On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, which of the top teams in the West will separate themselves from the rest of the field?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, we will state the case for each of the top teams in the Western Conference as to why they are the favorites in the West. We'll also talk about an emerging dark horse that just continues to win. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild and one half of the dynamic Western Conference Tuesday duo. Joined here today by Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators. Nick, we have reunited the dynamic duo. We're back. We are ready to dissect the Western Conference playoff chase.
It's about time, right? We've had work stuff. We've had some vacations in the mix. Just have not been able to get together. But man, here we are, and we got some good hockey to talk about because there's some good stuff going on in the Western Conference right now.
We've got juicy contenders in the West, and it has been up until recently Vancouver by a large margin. But all of a sudden now, the Vancouver Canucks with 98 points, they are just 1 point ahead of Chicago and Chicago. Wow. Colorado. How's that? That's better. 1 point ahead of Colorado and 1 point ahead of Dallas. Chicago is mathematically eliminated from the postseason. So
I was going to say I don't think Chicago is in the contendership for number one seed in the West at this point.
Not this year.
Yeah.
But then after that, you've got Winnipeg at 93, Edmonton at 88, Nashville at 88. And so the top of the West field is starting to kind of come together a little bit. One of these teams is going to be the number one seed in the Western Conference playoff picture. And so let's just start with Vancouver because they have been the team that has been in that spot for the longest, and they're starting to get themselves back on track after a little bit of a skid.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about some of the things that separate Vancouver from the West in terms of what they bring to the table. And all, I guess, the thing that stands out to me, Nick, about Vancouver is their depth. Like what they bring from an offensive standpoint, what they bring from a scoring standpoint. You're not going to find much better than the trio of JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, and Brock Besser. Those guys, all 30-plus goal scorers. They've got 67-plus points on the season. And so if you're talking about the things that you need for a playoff run, you got to have those number one go-to players. And so you talk about Vancouver having that. They've got a trio that stacks up against anybody else in the Western Conference is able to throw at them.
Yeah, let's face it. This has been the best line in the entire NHL this season. I think the best trio in the entire NHL this season. And that's kind of where the story of the Vancouver Canucks start is they're just so top heavy. And you talk about JT Miller and Elias Pettersson and Brock Besser, just being a really good combo. Let's not forget they have Quinn Hughes on the back end with 80 points this year. The guy who is probably going to win the Norris. So, your question was what makes Vancouver stand out is that across the NHL this year, they have been perhaps the most well-balanced team for the majority of the season. They're fifth in scoring this year. They're 4th in defense this year in terms of goals allowed. Thatcher Demko is up there in the conversation for the Vezina this year. They have the high end, scores. They have the franchise defender. Also, shout out to Philip Hronek, who's been great on the top pair this year for Vancouver. That's been an underrated, fantastic pickup for Patrick Alvin. And they have the goaltending. So they have franchise players and elite quality pairings / lines in every spot in the lineup. They have the elite first line. They have the elite first pair, and they have the elite goaltender. That's what makes them one of the most well-rounded teams in the entire NHL.
Yeah, they've really got pretty much everything that you would be looking for if you were going to hitch your wagons to a team to make a deep run here in this Western Conference playoff picture. So Vancouver, they continue to just cruise along, 7-2-1 in their last 10. And so they're looking like a team that wants to make a little noise. I know it's been a little bit of an uneven postseason for them over the last few years. So they're looking to make a run here this season. Now, a team rapidly at their heels is the Colorado Avalanche, who have won 9 games in a row, 97 points on the season. And you look at Colorado, and much like Vancouver, they boast a lot of the same things. You look at the top end guys that they have in their lineup. Of course, they've got Nathan MacKinnon, one of the best players on the planet. You've got Mikko Rantanen. You've got Valeri Nichushkin. You've got Cale Makar. Another story for the Avs, the depth that they throw at you. They've got 2 great top lines. They've got great top-end defense. I guess the only thing, and it's not even a knock on Georgiev because he's having a fantastic season again, 37-15-3, but that would be about the only thing that would worry me about the Avs this season is their goaltending has been good enough, to say the least, for them to obviously have an incredible season, but compared to some of these other teams in the West, it just does not. They don't have the advantage in net that some of these other teams are going to be able to come at them with.
Yeah, that's going to be where the story of the Colorado Avalanche live and die. Is Georgiev going to be good enough to carry them through a postseason, especially if you run into a team like, the Vancouver Canucks, who have Thatcher Demko and is a very, a Vezina quality goaltender. A team like a potential first-round matchup, the Nashville Predators and UC Saros, who is playing out of his mind right now. Like, if you get into those battles where it's like, maybe you're getting 35 shots on goal and you're good enough to stop the other 25, is your goaltender going to be able to make enough saves to outlast another hot goaltender? That's going to be the only question for the Colorado Avalanche. And you've seen it in a couple of games here recently where, it was just, they kind of came out slow, or, maybe Georgiev let in some softies. Of course, they dug themselves out of that 4-0 hole against Pittsburgh. Are you going to survive an early sort of performance like that in the postseason?
Yeah,
that's going to be the question for the Avs.
Well, and we saw it. We have seen it, I should say, over the last few seasons. Like I don't have the statistics per se, but how vital it is to be the team that scores first. Like, yeah. Through the postseason, it's pretty much by the book that the team that scores first wins a lot of these playoff games. So being able to have the offense to do that, but you've got to have the goaltending to be able to match. And so, you look at these two teams, I think Vancouver and Colorado, both pretty comparable in how they are drawn up. And so it's going to be fascinating to see, because you look at 2 other teams that are near the top of the list in the Western Conference that we'll talk about next. There's one that is pretty adept at stopping teams from scoring. And so that may be what gives the Winnipeg Jets the edge amongst the Western Conference field. We'll talk about them. We, of course, got to talk about arguably the deepest team in the West, the Dallas Stars. We've got a lot to get to as we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Sleeper. And as we move through the final month of the regular season, whether your team is jockeying for playoff positioning, is eliminated, or is trying like crazy to get into the playoff picture, you can still win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether top-level players like Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Alex Ovechkin, or Sidney Crosby will record more or less than their Sleeper projections in 8-player stats. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper, so start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Nick, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day?
Well, of course I am, Seth.
Do you have to turn the volume down with all of that yelling that they do when they're trying to get their point across?
Yeah, pretty much anytime Skip Bayless comes on the TV, it is an instant mute.
I've got some news for you. Make sure that you switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Nick, as we continue to break things down in the Western Conference, we talked about two teams that can throw a lot of scoring at you in the Vancouver Canucks, the Colorado Avalanche. And Colorado, number one in the West in terms of goals scored. Vancouver is third in the West. But we're going to start by talking about the team that has allowed the fewest goals in the Western Conference so far here in segment 2. That is the Winnipeg Jets. And you want to talk about a way to separate yourself from the fields in the postseason is being able to stop the opponent from scoring. And I think it's safe to say Winnipeg has probably the best depth at the blue line and goaltending put together of any of the Western Conference playoff hopefuls. They are real good at stopping teams from getting the puck in the net.
Yeah, Connor Hellebuck may be up there in the Hart Trophy discussion this year because he is the reason the Winnipeg Jets have done as good as they have been this season. And then you look at like Laurent Brossoit, who's been backing up Hellebuck this season. His save percentage is actually better than Connor Hellebuck, a guy that a lot of people think might be in the Hart Trophy conversation. So that gives you an idea of just how solid Winnipeg has been this year. You mentioned the depth on defense. That's another big part of it. You have, of course, Josh Morrissey, who every year seems to be getting a little bit better and a little bit better. I think he's safely in the top 10 of best defensemen in the NHL this year. They have a lot of really good depth players. Brendan Dillon having a really good year on that blue line there. Dylan DeMello, maybe his best season. Neil Pionk, it looks like he's kind of finally becoming the player that a lot of people think he could become. And the thing that strikes me about Winnipeg up front is they're kind of built like the Seattle Kraken last year, where they don't really have that surefire number one top line. Kyle Connor's been hurt this year. Mark Scheifele's been good, but not necessarily where he's been in the past few years. But there's so many people on that team capable of stepping up and scoring in big moments. You talk about, somebody like Nino Niederreiter. You talk about somebody like Sean Monahan, who's been, kind of a renaissance. They got in Tyler Toffoli at the trade deadline. They got Vlad Nemestikov. Cole Perfetti is kind of stepping up and being a good depth piece this year. Adam Lowry is having a good scoring season. Gabe Vilardi, absolutely highway robbery in that Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. So there's just so many people up and down the lineup that, maybe like they're not Nathan McKinnon or they're not Elias Pettersson, but you look and it's just Winnipeg has 4 really good, really well-balanced lines.
Yeah.
And it seems like that is how they're able to beat teams. Because look, if you're playing as good defensively and with good goaltending as Winnipeg is, you just need guys up front to win their matchups. And Winnipeg has the depth to do that.
Yeah, 11 players for Winnipeg that have scored 10 or more goals this season, and they got a couple of guys that are knocking on the door of getting to that mark, and that actually is on par with everybody else at the top of the Western Conference playoff standings. So scoring depth, but then a real good blue line and one of the best goalies in the NHL. That is how Winnipeg has made their bread this season. And if they end up being the team to represent the West in the Stanley Cup, it's going to be because of those two combinations. Now, this may be the deepest lineup of the teams that we've discussed, the Dallas Stars, because listen to this. The Dallas Stars have 6 different players and a 7th on the way that have scored 20-plus goals this season. That leads the West, and it is a lineup that has featured Logan Stankoven in a third-line role because there really isn't anywhere higher in the lineup that you could justify putting him. You got Jamie Benn playing third line. You've got Wyatt Johnston playing third line because you've got the likes of Jason Robertson. You've got Rupe Hintz. You've got Joe Pavelski. You got Matt Duchene with 24 goals this season playing second-line minutes. Nick, this Dallas offense, it is probably the deepest top to bottom in this Western Conference playoff picture. Jake Oettinger is no slouch himself. And so it's the scoring depth, I think, that sets Dallas apart. The only area that I really am concerned for them is on their blue line. Like that's going to be the one question mark for Dallas going into the postseason is, can that defense hold up? They can score with anybody. And so that's going to really help them out. But I need to see it from that blue line here.
Yeah, let's talk about Dallas's scoring first, because this is the offense that we kind of saw before the season when we were like, oh, Dallas is loading up. They might be a cup contender this year. Jason Robertson is just as good as he was last year. Matt Duchene, 62 points in 70 games. Wonder if the Nashville Predators are regretting that at all right now. And it's an interesting situation because they do have some players like Joe Pavelski, like Rupe Hintz, who aren't necessarily at the same level they were last year and the past couple of years. But Thomas Harley is a defenseman with 40 points, and he's the 10th leading scorer on the team. That would be like a top 5 score on a lot of playoff rosters right now. That goes to show you just how loaded this Dallas team is right now. And then you look in the back end and guys like Craig Smith with 10 goals and Sam Steele with 21 points. Radek Faksa, who, was, a sort of a middle 6 guy, has kind of moved down towards a depth role this year. Dallas has pieces all over the lineup. You mentioned, Seth, maybe the blue line being a problem. Obviously, Chris Tanev coming over from Calgary, that's a big addition that I think Dallas is kind of hoping to fill that hole. There are rumors that maybe they were kind of poking around the trade at maybe one more defender. Didn't happen this year, but my big question is just what Jake Oettinger are we going to get
Yeah.
in the postseason right now? Because on fire the last 3 games, kind of trash before that, and that cycle has continued for a lot of this season. 898 save percentage this year. That's not a stat line we're used to seeing from Oettinger. We're used to seeing him absolutely stealing games, being an absolutely, backdrop. So Dallas has, I think, the depth. I think they've done enough on defense to kind of shore up and compete with some of these big teams. It's all up to Jake Oettinger at this point.
Yeah.
If he is classic Jake Oettinger, Dallas is 100% a cup contender. If he is sort of inconsistent, then the Stars are in trouble again.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see how far that lineup can get the Stars, because it feels like, depending on the playoff matchups, which we'll talk about if the postseason started tomorrow, we'll talk about what we have for matchups, because that is an intriguing part of this too. So we will discuss, plus some dark horse contenders in the West, the Nashville Predators. We'll discuss as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. One final segment of today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan finishing a look at the Western Conference playoff picture. Nick, let's talk about the Nashville Predators, who have a 5-point lead on Vegas for the first wild card spot. But the Nashville Predators, arguably the hottest team in the NHL right now, not named Colorado. They've won 5 in a row, but they are on a stretch in which I think they have won 15 out of 17 games.
And those 2 non-wins were losses in overtime. So you have a 17-game point streak going right now.
And it's all because they played poorly enough to get told that they weren't going to see U2. That's all it took.
Yeah. That's the goal. Just book a concert and then suck enough that you can't go to it. And then all of a sudden you will be a Stanley Cup contender out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's so what do you think? What do you think about their chances to potentially make some noise here in this Western Conference playoff picture?
We just had this conversation on Locked On Predators today. If you want to go back and listen to that afterwards, shameless plug there. For the Nashville Predators, they've been playing like the team everybody sort of envisioned them being before the season. Under Andrew Burnett's system, they have the high-end scoring now. They have the offense where, look, I think everybody knows whenever the Nashville Predators were good the last couple of years or winning games, it wasn't necessarily in the prettiest of ways. It was the survive 40 shots on goal against you and just get a clutch goal from Michael McCarron or somebody like that. You look at the way the Predators have been beating teams during this winning streak, and they're doing it the same way Colorado or Tampa or Dallas or Vancouver are beating teams. They're controlling puck possession. They're out shooting opponents. They're not getting a lot of or giving up a lot of quality chances the other way. And when there are, UC Saros, who was not very good to start the year, is all of a sudden looking like the franchise goalie everybody knew he would be. So, look, this is the best I've seen the Nashville Predators as a team play probably since 2019 when they won the Central Division. This 15-game stretch is the best I've seen Philip Forsberg, is the best I've seen Roman Josi since his Norris year. Everything is trending in the right direction. It's just the $1 million question now, Seth. Can they keep this up till the end of the regular season? And can they keep it up into the postseason?
Yeah, that's the one. That is the question that is going to be on everybody's minds once we get there. Before we take a look at if the playoffs started tomorrow, what are the matchups? In looking at the rest of the teams, because obviously you still have Edmonton, you still have the Los Angeles Kings, and you still have Vegas. They're not necessarily in the chase for the top spot in the West, but they're still going to be in the playoffs.
Mhm.
Which of those teams is the one that could be the scariest? I know they've suffered just an inordinate amount of injuries this season, but the Vegas Golden Knights are still the defending champions, and all it takes is for them to get on a little bit of a run and get to the it's postseason time. We need to pick it up. I think they are a team that could potentially make some noise here, and I'll never bet against the team that has Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, although we know the story there. We know the story with those Edmonton teams.
Yeah.
It's usually not the issue of them not stepping up in the biggest moments. It's everybody else.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I just, if Vegas gets in and they sort of all of a sudden have that poof, all of our long-term injuries are suddenly all healed at the same time. This is a team that, remember, Seth, until those injury bugs hit, were the best team in the NHL for significant stretches of this season. And look, the goaltending situation, Aiden Hill has kind of been banged up. Logan Thompson kind of getting back to that all-star level we saw him at last year. They're probably going to get Mark Stone back in time for the playoffs if they make it.
They're going to make
Tomas Hertl as well. So all of a sudden, this team is reloaded for another cup run. It's hard to bet against them, especially the way they won it last year.
Yeah, it very much feels like Vegas is taking this with the get in and regroup directive. Like, get in, maybe get some reinforcements back, and then go on a run.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be daunting, because if we look at the matchups in the West right now, you'll have the Dallas Stars taking on the Winnipeg Jets for the 2-3 matchup in the Central. You got the Edmonton Oilers taking on the Los Angeles Kings in the Pacific for the 2-3 matchup. And then beyond that, correct me if I'm wrong, but since Vancouver is the number 1 seed, they will play Vegas, right?
Correct.
Okay.
As of now, yeah.
As of right now. And then Colorado will take on the Nashville Predators.
Mm-hmm.
So congrats on getting in. You get to go contend with Colorado.
Yeah. Although not completely out of the question that Colorado leapfrogs Vancouver to take over that number 1 spot.
You know what they should just do? Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know why this isn't done. Anyway, but they gotta do the 1 through 8 seeding. Like, yeah. I'm just pulling it up what that would be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It
so
would be.
Are we doing the 2 division leaders at the top then?
No, we're just going strictly 1 through 8.
All right, so it would be Vancouver and Vegas still.
Yep. Colorado and Los Angeles. Dallas and Nashville.
Dallas and Nashville.
Yep.
And then
Winnipeg and Edmonton.
Yeah. Which that's a banger of a series right
there. Spicy. That is a spicy one.
Yeah. It's time to bring that back,
It's
just, I feel like we're at a point where it's just a lot of these matchups are stale.
Mm-hmm.
The division, sort of matchup just kind of puts the same teams against each other every single year, the same sort of path.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to, and I don't know if it's in the cards or not, but I would just love to see the NHL go back to the older ways of doing it, and just I feel like it just gives us more opportunity for fresh matchups. You don't have a situation like you did last year where neither Tampa Bay nor Toronto were trying at the end because the matchup was kind of set for the last 3 weeks of the season. I just think it opens up so much more, both from an entertainment value and both from a competitive standpoint. Try to switch things up a little bit.
Because then if you let's just assume in the 1 through 8, let's just assume that all of the top seeds win. Then what you get is Vancouver and Winnipeg and Dallas and Colorado as your second round matchups. And you mean to tell me that those are not more compelling second round series than first round series?
Yeah.
You should be trying to get those teams matched up in the later rounds. Because and let's say Edmonton pulls off the upset. Then you get Vancouver and Edmonton in the second rounds. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. You want your best teams to be later in the playoffs, like as late in the playoffs as possible.
Yeah.
And that's just, I feel like just what the concept of the playoffs should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, it's just, you have the potential that the two best teams in the league could be going at it in the second round. It's time for a change, and I hope the NHL maybe tweaks some things down the road.
Gary, if you're listening, you can have this for free. I just did all the work for you. You can have it.
Yeah. We're here to be the competition committee.
Not even going to take any royalties or consulting fees. Just make it happen.
Yeah.
That's all we're asking. I just kind of am selfishly looking forward to being able to most likely watch the postseason from a fan perspective in full this year, because the Minnesota Wild obviously are on the outside looking in, and with Vegas playing and leading as of the time of recording 1-0 over the St. Louis Blues, also playing tonight, and then playing on Thursday. They could pretty much have it wrapped up, I think, all but the mathematical elimination at that point.
Yeah.
So,
congratulations on having a terrible season, I guess.
Yeah, it feels great.
Yeah, you get the summer off.
Yeah, a lot of draft coverage coming up.
Yeah.
But we will keep an eye on how things materialize as we get closer to the postseason. So make sure to stay with Locked On NHL throughout the week as well. We got a full array of panelists covering everything about the NHL, whether it be Western Conference Tuesday, whether it be Eastern Conference Wednesday tomorrow. We've got power rankings for you, teams at large. We've got it all at Locked On NHL. So make sure to subscribe on your so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.